Jason Bloomfield's family thought he was missing. They searched, called, and begged for answers. What they didn't know was that Jason was already gone, his body left inside his own apartment. And the person who put him there stayed in that same room for 5 days, sleeping next to him. Why would anyone do that? And what happened in the hours before Jason's life was taken? This is Unseen Archives. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next story. Jason Bloomfield was 46 years old, living in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He was close to his family, and they described him as someone who always stayed in touch. When he suddenly stopped answering calls, alarm bells rang quickly. Days went by with no word from him. His girlfriend, Vianita Lennon, was the last person known to be with him. At first, no one thought she might be involved. To friends and neighbors, it looked like a missing person case, a man who had disappeared without a trace. But Jason's family wasn't convinced. They pressed for answers, telling police this was out of character. He had no reason to vanish, no reason to cut off contact. Something felt wrong. The search began. Relatives put out calls. Police did welfare checks. Still, Jason's apartment door stayed closed. Behind that door, the truth was waiting. A truth far more disturbing than anyone imagined. Jason Bloomfield was known as a family man. At 46, he had built strong ties with his loved ones in Fort Lauderdale. Relatives described him as reliable and warm, the kind of person who always checked in. He had friends who respected him, and he stayed close to his mother and siblings. Jason's sudden silence was more than unusual. It was alarming, because he was never the type to simply disappear. His girlfriend, Vianita Lennon, was at the center of his personal life. She had been around Jason's circle, and some people thought she cared for him. But others noticed friction. Arguments had been overheard. Their relationship was far from stable, and those close to Jason sometimes worried about the way things were going. Behind closed doors, their connection grew tense. Small disagreements often turned into loud confrontations. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices. Family members noticed Jason seemed stressed in the weeks before his disappearance. Still, no one could have predicted what was coming, because while Jason's family searched for him, convinced something terrible had happened, the person closest to him, Vianita, was living in his apartment with a secret that would soon shock everyone. What shocked investigators most was not only that Jason Bloomfield had been killed, but that Vianita Lennon stayed in that apartment with his body for nearly a week. She slept in the same bed, lived among the smell of decay, and acted as though nothing had happened. When questioned, her explanations changed from one moment to the next. She told detectives Jason's death had been sudden. Later, she suggested he had harmed himself. At another point, she claimed she was too afraid to call police. None of it added up, and the evidence in the apartment told a story very different from hers. There were bloodstains that pointed to violence. There were signs of a struggle. Jason had not simply collapsed. Something terrible had happened in that room, and Vianita was the only other person there. Outside the apartment, the community was stunned. Neighbors who had seen Jason only days earlier were horrified when they learned he had been inside his home the entire time. Some admitted they had noticed a strong odor, but never thought it could be a decomposing body. Others recalled hearing arguments, but they never imagined those fights would end in death. The media covered the case with disbelief. Reports described how Jason's family had searched and prayed for answers. All along, Vianita was living with the secret behind closed doors. Medical examiners later confirmed Jason had been dead for 5 days before police discovered him. 5 days where his girlfriend continued her daily routine, knowing his body was only a few feet away. Why did she stay? Why not run? And what did she hope to gain by hiding the truth? The answers were unclear, but one thing was certain. Her behavior was unlike anything detectives had ever seen. As detectives pressed further, new questions emerged about Vianita Lennon's past and the nature of their relationship with Jason. Arguments had been common between them, and people close to Jason recalled moments when those disagreements seemed to take a darker turn. he had confided to relatives that things were not always easy at home. The possibility of ongoing domestic issues gave investigators another angle to explore. Was Jason's death the result of one fight that went too far, or was it part of a pattern that had been building for months? Then came another puzzle. Why did Vianita remain in that apartment? Most people, after such an act, would flee, hide, or at least try to cover their tracks. But she chose to stay, night after night, in the same room where Jason's body lay. Detectives debated whether this pointed to fear, confusion, or something far more troubling in her mind. Meanwhile, Jason's family was not waiting quietly. They demanded answers at every step, contacting police daily and pushing for more action. To them, it was not just a case on the books. It was their brother, their son, a man they had loved and trusted. Their persistence kept pressure on investigators, ensuring the case could not fade into the background. But as detectives began to uncover more about Vianita's behavior and her history with Jason, the picture that formed was even more unsettling than they expected. And what they would soon reveal would change how everyone saw the case. Detectives worked through the evidence, searching for a motive. Early on, they considered the most common triggers: money, jealousy, and heated arguments that spiral out of control. Jason and Vianita had fought before, and investigators believed one of those fights may have ended in tragedy. But other questions complicated the case. Was Jason's death planned, or was it an outburst that turned deadly? If it was premeditated, what would drive her to such a decision? If it was a crime of passion, why didn't she call for help afterward? Mentius, certain facts believed she had snapped in a moment of anger. Others felt her actions showed planning, pointing to her decision to stay in the apartment as proof she was hiding the truth. Even as the theories spread, one fact was clear. Jason Bloomfield had lost his life, and the circumstances were more disturbing with each detail that emerged. And soon, the investigation would move toward a resolution that brought both answers and more questions. After days of investigation, police placed Vianita Lennon under arrest. She was charged with the murder of Jason Bloomfield. In court filings, prosecutors described her as the person responsible for his death, pointing to the physical evidence inside the apartment and the fact that she remained with his body instead of calling for help. Her defense painted a different picture. They suggested she had acted out of fear or that Jason's death was not intentional. But the inconsistencies in her story made those claims difficult to believe. Each time she was asked what happened, her answers shifted, leaving more doubt than clarity. For Jason's family, the arrest was not the end of their pain. They had lived through the search, the discovery, and now the courtroom hearings. Losing Jason in such a violent way left a mark that would never fade. His mother spoke of a son taken too soon. His relatives gathered in grief, struggling to understand how an argument between two people could end in such horror. The case also left a broader lesson. What begins as ordinary conflict, an argument behind closed doors, can sometimes lead to unthinkable outcomes. In Jason's story, an argument between partners became a tragedy that cost a man his life and shattered the lives of everyone who loved him. But even with an arrest and charges, the haunting question remains: why did Vianita stay in that apartment night after night with the body of the man that she had just taken from his family? It is a question that lingers, and one that may never have a full answer. She murdered him, and then chose to live beside his body for 5 long days. Why? That is the question that may never be fully answered. Was this a carefully planned act, or a heated argument that went too far? And what could possibly keep someone inside that apartment, night after night, with the man that they had just taken from their family? What do you think? Was it premeditated murder, or a crime of passion? And why didn't she leave? Share your thoughts in the comments. This is Unseen Archives. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next story.